Hello, my name is Jim Hormell, and I am having a conversation with my father, William Thomas Hormell, on October 21st, 2017, in Lapel, Indiana, regarding his service in the military. And the interview is being recorded by Mr. Matt McClellan. So, Dad, let's first begin with some biological background. So, when and where were you born?
Well, I was born in Washington, Pennsylvania, on June 29th of 1928. That was my beginning, and I lived in Pennsylvania for probably 18 years until I went into the Navy. But graduated from high school in 1946. Let's see, I had a lot of good experiences in high school. And one thing I would like to say is that I'm a born-again Christian. And when I was in high school, before I got into the driving end of it, my dad made the comment to me that if I wanted to become active and go into church activities, that would be fine with him, and he would see that I got me there and back home, which was good, and I followed up on that ever since. There's one incident that I would like to share. My dad went from Washington, Pennsylvania to Brockway, Pennsylvania, where he was a glass bottle mold maker. And he went to work for Brockway Glass Company there in Brockway. And my mom and I would travel back and forth on the train until they got established pretty well at home and all. And as we were on the train, you got to picture this. Most of the time, when the engine went into the roundhouse, they would turn the engine 180 degrees so they were headed back from where they came. The cars the passenger cars had seats on them that would flip back and forth, so you didn't have to turn the cars around. You just walked through and changed the seats. And it so happened that there was a nun, a sister, if you want to call it, whichever, and she sat down facing my mother. And they had a conversation, and the nun asked my mom, she said, "Would you mind if I pray for that young man?" And Mom said, "Of course not." She said, "Go right ahead." And I have no idea what the prayer was, I know where it went, but I don't know what the wording was or anything. But I think that had quite a bearing on the rest of my life. A pretty good start. Yeah. And as like I said, I graduated from high school in 1946. I was we had a group of students in my senior class that were very, acclimated to activities outside of school, along with school. I was in a group that sang at church on a regular basis on Sunday morning. It was a church choir. And we had a wonderful director. And we would go to nursing homes, and they weren't nursing homes at that time, they called them the poorhouse. And sing for the occupants of the house. Okay. So we traveled in a school bus or vans, whatever was available. But after I worked in the glass factory there for probably, I don't know, maybe a year and a half. And I went into work one night and had a slight accident. I fell and stripped my shin from ankle to knee, and I was very angry. In fact, I was angry to the point of taking my hat off and stomping on the floor. And I went downstairs and talked to the foreman. I told him, I said, "If that's the only job you got for me in this place, I'm going. I'm out of here." So then Dad told me that if I wanted to go to college, that he would his best to finance me if I went to college. And I had his sister, which would be my aunt, was I stayed with them in their house in Washington while Mom and Dad were there in Brockway. But I made the wrong decision as to my major. They wanted me to, but I was convinced that I should take business administration. Well, that just wasn't my ball of wax. I mean, when I was in school, of course, I was always taking my bicycle apart and putting it back together, re-greasing and oiling, and taking very good care of it.
Right.
But so I was more mechanically inclined than if you want to call it studying.
Right.
And after that year of college, I actually flunked out of the business administration area, filled up there. So I decided, well, I tried to find a job. No jobs available. I walked in and I'd say, ask them about the jobs, and they say, well, how old are you? Well, I'm 18. Well, have you had service time? No, I haven't. Well, sorry, we can't use you. So I'd go to the next place and try to interview there. And finally, after probably about nearly a year, I decided, well, I'll take care of that. So I went and enlisted in the Navy. And that was it. I went through the paperwork at Du Bois, Pennsylvania, and then went into Pittsburgh. And they shipped me off to the Great Lakes. I don't remember the exact location of but it took the physical. And I'm talking about, if you can imagine, 120 guys in the middle of a room without a stitch of clothes on any of them, and standing just in ranks, and guy walking up and down the ranks, checking things off with it. Have you ever had the measles? Have you had the mumps and all that stuff?
Yeah.
It's a general physical activity. Right. And I passed the physical, and shipped me off to Great Lakes Naval Training Station, which is where I spent the next about 14 weeks, because I was in Naval Hospital for about 2 weeks because of a lung abscess. But I tell you, one of the things that really was impressive to me, at graduation from basic training, they have on a Saturday, they would have a graduation ceremony for each class, each group of men that went through.
Mm-hmm.
And to stand, to be in the procession was great. We formed ranks. There was 120 men in the group. They had what they call a guidon, which was a flagman would be on my right hand corner of our group. We marched in unison, in step, before the reviewing stand. And as you go through the reviewing stand, you salute to the officials in the grandstand.
Right.
But to see that, I can still picture that in my mind, as that those guys walking through there, that was a sight that, unless you've experienced it, you can't really appreciate the impact that it has. To see that many people in that unison, marching, all of them in step, the band playing, the flags flying, and just kind of a very, very uplifting situation.
Mm-hmm.
And we had one incident there at boot camp before the graduation. We had a what they call a DI, their drill instructor, which was a chief petty officer. And he was in charge of this group of guys. And he made it very plain that he was the boss, and what he wanted done now.
Right.
So we were some of the guys were shooting the breeze one night after the lights were out, and he came in. He said, "Now guys," said, "the lights are out. This is quiet hour. You're supposed to be quiet." That wasn't the wording exactly that he used, but that's all right. But he went out, and he hadn't more than hardly stepped out the door, and here this chatter started again. So he just turned around, come back, and said, okay. Now here, you got to realize that here's 120 guys in a barracks. All of our belongings, each one of us have separate sea bags, almost like a locker.
Mm-hmm.
And they're tied up to a stanchion in the middle of the barracks. He said, get your sea bags. So we untied our sea bags. And there was a blacktop area between the buildings. We called it the grinder. It was a drill area.
Okay.
He said it took us out there, and here we are with these sea bags over our heads. I don't know how many laps around that drill field we went. But after, I don't know, I suppose maybe 10 or 15 laps, if 20 maybe. And he stopped us and he said, okay guys, he said, do you think you can be quiet? And of course it was, yes sir, yes sir. So in we went, and you could have heard a pin drop in that barracks that night after that. But they had a radio in there, but the radio was up in an enclosure, and it was locked. And they had it set to the local radio station, and we couldn't change it. I mean, we had no choice on what we were listening to. It was what they set up. But that was probably a 12-week period. And now you have to picture this at Great Lakes in November and December. It gets pretty daggone cold up there and breezy.
Right.
And the entire training unit would go out on the drill field. I mean, it was a huge drill field. Form ranks, stand at parade rest, and listen to the Articles of War. Maybe be out there for 25, 30 minutes listening to all that chatter.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we'd go back to our barracks. But to stand at parade rest in the middle of an open field with the wind blowing like it was, that was a pretty miserable situation.
Yeah.
But that was part of it.
Right.
But all in all, I came out of boot camp and decided that since I was a little bit mechanically inclined, that I had kind of made up my mind that I would try to learn to be a diesel mechanic. I figured, well, the construction that was going on after the war would be a good area to be into. You know, there's plenty of work available.
Right.
Well, the thing I wasn't aware of was that if you were an operator on any of this heavy machinery, but your excavators, your bulldozers, and all that kind of stuff, you were the mechanic, but as well as the operator. In other words, if there was any maintenance to be done, you did that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you weren't, how shall I say this? If you weren't trained on the mechanical part of it, the operating part of it was kind of secondary.
Oh, okay.
It was an important part of it, but I had never had any kind of experience on any heavy equipment, so that left me out.
Mm-hmm.
So I bummed around for a little bit, and they're coming out opening in the glass factory. And I went into that and learned to be I was cleaning molds. You got to realize in the glass molding, they coat the inside of the molds, the cast iron molds, with a mixture of oil and graphite to keep the glass from sticking to the molds. Whenever the old molds opened up, the glass dropped out of it. So my job was to take those filthy molds, take them into the shop, set them up in a machine and blast all that carbon and stuff off the molds.
Right.
And set them up for the mold makers.
Mm-hmm.
And that pretty much was the story of it. I was very fortunate because the time in service gave me an edge on anybody else in the shop. If there was apprenticeship opened up, I would be the first one. I would be much more qualified because of my time in service.
Mm-hmm.
That added to the maximum age to get into it.
Okay.
So, but to get back to the service time, I come out of the engineman school at Great Lakes and went on home on 30-day leave, which was standard procedure. And then from there to Brooklyn Navy Yard and aboard a ship. It was the USS Mara in AGS 16. That's Auxiliary Geographic Survey. And our main job during the time in port was to resupply the ship, because we would be gone for probably up to 6 to 8 months at a time. And you had to have plenty of supplies on board. And if you figure 400 men, 3 meals a day, there's a lot of supplies, a lot of stuff now, a lot of it was powdered, powdered eggs, powdered milk, all that kind of stuff. It was nourishing, but it wasn't the most tasty in the world. But
yeah.
Before going, or after getting all this material stuff loaded on board ship and stashed away, we had what they called, there was what they call reefers. They were refrigeration units, huge. I have no idea how to tell you the size of them. Mounted up on the decks, welded fast so they wouldn't slide off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we stored all this stuff that had to be in these reefers. Anything that had to be kept cold, like any kind of meat or bacon and all that kind of stuff, had to be kept cold in those reefers. And along with that, on board that ship, we had 6 landing craft. Now, landing craft are probably upwards of 4, I don't know the exact dimensions, but I think they're about 40 feet high, 40 feet long. And they had an open well deck. And the well deck was just about, the edge of it was about armpit height, where you could stand up and lay your arm on top of it and rest. But that's what we used to haul of our equipment. We had several Jeeps on the board. We had 2 what they call DUKW, that's the amphibious truck.
Mm-hmm.
We had 2 of them. And there was 6 of those landing craft, but then there was 4 more what they called echo sounding boats on board. Up above the water, up above the main deck, the second deck. And those boats, 2 of them were 40 foot long, 2 of them were 50 foot. Both of them had twin diesel engines. And the crew was a 5-man crew on each one of them. And we'd go out, we were doing in-close work next to, in the shallow water. Because it was a wooden hull, and if you run aground, so be it, you patch that up real quickly.
Right.
But we ate our meals, and we'd come back aboard ship about every 4, 5, 6 days, change clothes, restock our equipment and stuff, and out we go again. It was out a routine. It was just, and the ship itself, they operated in the deep water, and they set up a grid pattern. They had 3 radar beacons set up back here and there, and every so often they register the depth underneath the ship.
Okay.
Well, with these 3 beacons, they could triangulate the exact location and the depth of the water at that location. That was the idea of the sand has a tendency to shift with the tides and currents. They had these big, they're mega tankers now, hauling crude oil from the the dock there.
Mm-hmm.
They'd load them up and then ship them back and go around back out through the Mediterranean and back into the States or wherever they were going.
Okay.
And offload and then fill them with water and come back again, dump the water and put the oil in. And I'm kind of getting ahead of the story. The weather was very, very unusual, different, very different.
Yeah.
I can remember one time I was on that 40-foot boat out in the middle of that Persian Gulf. The land, we couldn't even see land from where we were at. And one of those, I'm not sure what they call them now, but it was a sandstorm.
Mm-hmm.
They get a lot of wind and it blows all that sand, it just picks it up and it's just dust.
Yep.
But you had no communications during that time because the radio was just useless, static, and you just turn it off because it wasn't anything.
It wasn't any good, yeah.
But the one thing we had to do at that point was to keep what they call steerage way. You had to keep that boat headed into the storm, into the wind, because the waves were pretty good size.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got crossways of that, you could capsize.
Right.
So the object was to keep that boat headed into the storm, to keep it balanced.
Okay.
And of course, depending how long the storm lasted, how long were and you just keep enough speed up to keep the boat headed into the storm. And enough, crank on the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And those little old diesel engines were a lifesaver at that point.
Yeah.
But the Arabs, they were kind of indifferent to it. They didn't think too much about it. But they about went crazy when the first time we pulled in over there. They set those DUKWs, those amphibious trucks, set them in the water and come across the harbor on the shore, right up on the shore, and just keep right on going,
Mm-hmm.
The wheels drop, and pump the air up, and away we went.
Right.
But we also had two, I call them 6-bys. They were armored trucks with the rear axles, where there were 2 axles with a single wheel on each end. So you had 2 wheels behind the drive wheels in the front.
Mm-hmm.
All the wheels were in line with each other, so that when the front was made to tracks, and the back could follow into the tracks, and it gave a lot of stability to the truck.
Right.
There was a winch on the front. Now, it's something about the desert that's unusual that we run across. It would have soft spots. And those soft spots of those trucks would run along, and all of a sudden you just turn the axle in sand.
Mm.
So what they had to do, they carried a railroad tie, cross tie,
Mm-hmm.
on the front of that vehicle. Whenever you got into something like that, you take the tie, take it on out ahead of the truck, and dig a trench. Set that tie in that trench with a cable back to the truck with that winch on the front. Start the winch up and pull that truck right up out of the sand. When you got up to where the tie was, you just pick it up and set it back up on the front and away you go.
Okay.
But it was a big method of transportation. On board we also had a helicopter, a small one. And I'm trying to think, I can't think of the name of the city. There was a major airport at the city, and they would go in on a periodic, like once a day. The helicopter would go fly in and pick up the mail and any kind of, if we had parts ordered that we had to have to repair a boat or something, they'd pick it up with that and bring it back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still remember they had a difficulty one time when the last trip I was over there, probably maybe a month before the time for us to leave, head back. They sent the helicopter in to pick up the mail, and the helicopter was just lifting off, and a commercial aircraft that went flew over top of it, just flipped that thing upside down. So and when they brought it back, they put it on a flatbed in one of those landing craft.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was a barge actually. They brought it out and set it up there on the ship. And of course, there's nothing you can do with just tie it down because it was done. That was at the end of it.
Right.
But this guy was the pilot. He was a comedian. He told us, he said, one of these days, you guys, he said, you watch. He said, I'm going to flip that thing. He said, I'm going to turn it up around. Do you a loop, see? So everybody's hanging right on that. So one day he told me, he said, okay guys, this is it. He said, you watch it. And we took off and took it. He didn't turn it upside down, he just made a loop. you know,
Yeah.
backed it around and back around, flew off. But it kind of, he was, like I said, he was a comedian. But each time that helicopter took off, one of our landing craft was in the water on standby, with the engine running and the crew on board ready to take off. If that chopper would have to go down, the object was to get that boat to that chopper to pick up the crew or whatever they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of an emergency situation.
Right.
And all the time that we were at sea, they set up a what they call a lifeboat watch. There was a full crew. There's three-man crew on these landing craft. You had a guy that took care of the bow, and the other one on the stern, and then the coxswain. The coxswain, the guy who did to run the controls, throttles, steering, and everything.
Right.
The guy on the stern took care of the tying up the boats when we went in. He and the bow hook, the two of them, had to get the lines across and tie the boats up till we get everything organized, and then throw them off, and away we go. But there's so many of the things that it's hard to put this without trying to categorize everything. Something that I guess that was very impressive to me. When we were in Brooklyn, we were tied up in the East River to a pier on the East River. And each morning, the guys would it was breakfast time. They would line along the side of the ship, along the life rails, and line up to go into the mess hall and get their breakfast, then they go back and go to work.
Right.
But when that was a routine that we went through every day. But when we got ready to leave, there's nothing that can compare to getting a ship ready to go to sea. Because you got to have everything, how shall I put it? Everything has to be tied down. Anything that's loose, it has to be tied down, because if they get out and that ship gets to rolling and pitching and everything, it's hard to tell where it might wind up. And as you go down through the harbor, one of the last things you can remember seeing is the Statue of Liberty. As we went by the Statue of Liberty, it's just almost like there was a few moments there where it wasn't total silence, but everybody had that, what do you call it?
Kind of a sense of
adventure,
yeah,
if you want to call it
right.
that.
Yeah.
We didn't know what to expect, because once you get out of the harbor, you hit the open water. God knows what you're going to run into before you get to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one incident where when we came back from one of those trips, that we were in the middle of between two hurricanes. There was a hurricane south and north of us, and we sailed in between. And the water line was 16 feet from the water line to the peak of the bow. And I stood in the forward compartment and watched solid blue water break over that bow.
Wow.
That ship would pitch into it and up and down. And when it was over the top like that, here you are, the ship is sitting up on top of this wave. The stern is out of the water and the bow is out of the water. The water is underneath the middle. Well, that puts the screws, the propeller, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
they're out in the open. And here they are, and they just shake the daylights out of it. I mean, that ship would quiver all over.
Right.
When the props were hitting the water, but it wasn't enclosed. That's what I'm saying. It was on the surface, somewhat on the surface. But it was just. There's nothing about the life aboard ship is absolutely, totally, completely different on anything you experience on land. I mean, it's a routine. Everybody has a job to do, and the guy, if you're going to go as a team, fine. That's part of it. The poor guy that was on, they had during that time of that storm, the guy they had electricians. See, this is what they call a hydroelectric ship. He had a stern steam turbines that turned turbines that generated electricity that went through the panel that ran the engines or the motors that drove the props. So it was a combination to deal. Well, the poor guys that are on this controlling the RPMs and all the screws and everything,
Mm-hmm.
when we hit that rough weather, that just about drove them guys nutty because they were constantly starting slow, speed it up, slow it down. But it was, that's what I'm saying, that each guy had a job to do.
Right.
And it was bad enough that they didn't even allow anybody out on what they call the weather decks. Any deck that was open to the outside, if you went from forward or aft to ship, let's see, the forward was on the starboard, forward on the starboard side, and aft on the port side. The starboard side is the right, port's left. And in order to avoid confusion,
Mm-hmm.
collisions and everything, that was a routine. But that was established right off the beginning. But I'm kind of getting away from the story so much.
Well, what exactly when you say when you went to sea, where were you going, or what is it that you were actually? What was your mission, I guess?
Oh, we were headed for the Persian Gulf because we were making new navigational charts.
Oh, okay.
Because those big old tankers, if they run them aground, they had to wait for the tide to change before they could break them loose because there wasn't enough. They didn't have enough power, enough drive on the screws. It was plenty to keep the ship going.
Right.
But when it got exceptionally hard drive of power, it wouldn't handle it.
Oh, okay.
So they'd have to wait till the tide lifted that ship. Because now I don't know if you've ever noticed on the bow of a ship, right at the water line, you have a point. The bow is on a line.
Yep.
But below that, if you watch sometime, looks like the nose of a torpedo.
Yeah.
Below the water line.
Right.
And that would go into the sand and just act like when you go in it, shove the sand aside, and then the sand would close back in around it and almost take a suction on it. And it was just almost impossible to get it to break loose until you had to raise the whole thing up. So that was part of the reason we were over there to start with. And that's like they said with the triangulation and location of the readings and so on and so forth. It was rather monotonous to a certain extent, but it was livable.
Provided a service. Yeah.
Pardon?
It provided a service.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, here's another thing about being aboard ship at sea. You're limited to fresh water. Because you're making fresh water, and not making fresh, but you pump water out of the ocean, pump it through what they call an evaporator. It would boil the steam, that they catch the steam, they pump the brine back overboard and catch the steam and then condense it and use it in the boilers.
Right.
And you had to have, there was a minimum amount of salt because if you get those boilers salted up, you're done. I mean, if it gets where it's not producing that steam, you're in trouble.
Right.
I never got into that part, but I was always on the boats,
Yeah.
And just so many little things I can remember that took place. Part of my job on board ship when we were in the Gulf itself was to be what they call the oil king. And the idea was that my job was to go topside. We had a set of valves and a hose and everything up there. And I'd lower that hose over the side to refuel the boats. I'd go turn the pumps on and open the valves until they got what they needed down there and shut them off, and then I'd take the hose back up. We had one boat, the seaman, I could see that guy like yesterday. The coxswain told this bow hook, he said, be sure to keep that boat away from the side of the ship, because if you get up there, he said, you scratch the paint on either one,
Uh-huh.
you will replace the paint.
Oh, okay.
In other words, you gotta keep it apart.
Right.
We had fenders over the side, but they didn't completely do the job.
Mm-hmm.
So Turley was the guy's name. Like I said, I should remember that was yesterday. So he gets up on the bow and he starts walking his hands side by side down the side of the ship. See, putting the boat for shoving the boat away.
Mm-hmm.
And he lost his balance, and down he went. Come up spluttered, you know.
Yeah.
But it was,
Lots.
that was one of those comical things, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So reflecting on, you know, your overall experience in the Navy, how has that impacted your life overall? And then what kind of a message would you have to say, I mean, to individuals that would be watching this video in the future, like future generations? What kind of things would you have to say to them based on your experiences?
I guess part of it is discipline. In order for this entire 400 men on a ship to serve as a unit, they have to be a part of a team. Each man got the job. Well, you know how a basketball team is. Each man has a specific job to do out there on the floor. That's the way it was on board ship. Each man had something to do. Now they were broken up into sections. That is duty, what they call the duty sections. Part of it, about half the crew was on duty. The rest of them were resting on four-hour rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And it just keeps constantly moving.
Right.
And what I was mentioning about the fresh water too, these evaporators, they kept a very close watch on those. That was one of the most important jobs of the along with steering unit, keeping that water fresh, clean for the boilers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 24/7 job. There was no question about that.
Yeah.
But how would I recommend it? Of course, I'm looking at the difference between today and at that time. Now that we're talking in the late 40s, early 50s,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in, to today.
Right.
And one of the things I see that I think that it was very beneficial was the idea of respect. Now, respect the other person, either what their job is or how they live, or whatever. It's just, you don't, how shall I put this? Don't expect everybody to live according to your rules.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, if you don't have regulations, you got chaos.
Right.
And can you imagine the highways today with no speed limits? Or no police officers out there to keep stuff held, maintained a kind of a regulation or a system or whatever you wish to call it. But I guess that would be one of the things that I would I made the comment several times that I thought it would be good for every young person coming out of school, out of high school, to spend maybe 6 months to a year either in a military academy or in the military, the service of the country. Because that basis from there on out, that's the regulation of your attitude. And you don't change, it doesn't change as time goes on. It doesn't make it, very, but the teamwork, I guess, is the fundamental of what I'm getting at, that everybody has to do their part to keep things organized.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that
I think that pretty much covers it.
have we got the time all right?
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, yeah, you're very welcome. Like I said, I get to reminisce, and then there's a lot of things that happened over the period.
Yeah.
You know, that I got into trouble a couple of times. I stuck my neck out when I should have kept my mouth shut. But that was part of the deal, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, I almost had to stand captain's mast one time. First class petty officer said, "Well, come on." He said he lived in Pittsburgh. He said, "Let's go home for the weekend." I thought, "Oh boy, here, you know, leave on Friday and come back on Sunday night." Well, he had an old Kaiser, and on the way back from home, it broke down. And of course, here we are out in the middle of no place, and we finally got it fixed up, but we were several hours late when we got back aboard ship. When that puts you on report, you know.
Yeah.
And that, the thing too there, that by respecting authority, when that's the basic idea of the boot camp, is to break everybody into this routine of we're all working together.
Yes.
And this guy's the boss, and when he says drop, or he says move, don't ask him how far, which direction, you just start moving.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess that would be my takeoff of the whole thing was the value of the respect that we learned out in boot camp. Yeah. And now I transferred off of that geographic survey ship onto what they call a PC out of Newport, Rhode Island, and that was a patrol craft, they call it. We had K guns for depth charges on each port and starboard. We had 2 racks on the stern for what they call the ash cans, and a 3-inch 50 up on the bow to get their attention. And we went out and operated every day. So take off in the morning and come back in the evening, and we lived high on the hog. I'll tell you what, we were way ahead of everybody else. Go into the galley on Sunday morning, talk to the cook, and the cook say, "Well, how do you want your eggs fixed this morning?"
Oh, okay.
Which is very unusual.
Yeah.
But that was the altogether difference, because on the big ship there was 400 men. You can't hardly do that on 400 men.
Right.
But on the PC we're talking about 55, maybe 60 men at the outside.
Yeah.
And it was pretty much a family affair, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys had their families up there. They'd go ashore of an evening when we came back in off the operation, and they'd come back aboard ship in the morning before we took off. And living at home just like a job, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the rest of us, you know, there's an allotment that if you got so many people, there's a certain amount of money that's given, of course, to your feed and all that stuff. Well, we had steak and chicken and all the good stuff practically every day of the week, because the guys were going home and they were eating supper at home and then breakfast in the morning. So the rest of us, we're slurping up all that was left over.
Right.
Yeah.
It worked out then. All righty.
One other point.
Okay.
At Newport, Rhode Island, as you come out of the Navy Yard gate, there was a little restaurant there. It was a combination of a bar and restaurant together, that type of thing. When you come out of the gate, up on the front it said "First Chance."
Okay.
Okay, then you go out and you go do all your liberty and so on, come back aboard, and you come down and you're on the other side of that sign, "Last Chance," before you go back aboard ship. So there's so many things that I have to give high regard to the Marine Corps. There's always you've always heard about the friction between the two. But those guys, I don't know, they're just, I don't know how to exactly describe it. They call them, they're referred to on occasion, not in the kindest term, but as the Navy police force.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they're keeping us in line.
Oh, okay.
There's a half a dozen stories about guys coming back off of Liberty with a bottle tucked under their britches,
Yeah.
stepping up on the quarterdeck, and the Marine looked down and says, "You got a drink, liquor with you?" "No, sir, no." "Let me see you." They'd take a nightstick and wham, and hit the back across the belly. Well, if you hit it just right, the guy had to go take a shower, wash his clothes. Well, that's pretty much all of it, I guess.
All right.
I don't want to bore you with any other.
No, it's not been boring at all. It's been very educational.